I also encourage foster parents to use the Individuals with Disabilities Act in order to get an individualized education plan or an IEP. Trauma is not its own category under IDEA, and it should be. We have to kind of sneak it in under other categories, but trauma is its own category. It is a disability that these children are dealing with. So we need to redo that. And then under ESSA, we need to bring in some more strategic planning around independent living skills. So even if our kids are going to school and they're able to get enrolled immediately, they're coming out of school and not succeeding as adults. And a lot of that has to do with this lack of independent living skills. So we need to build some more of that back into our school systems, just making sure that we're not graduating kids just to graduate them.
Welcome to Her Desired Haven Podcast, a community where we come together to discuss all things Jesus, family, life, and faith. I'm your host, LaShaundra. Thank you for stopping by today. Today's guest is an educational advocate for children in foster care. Her work focuses on training foster parents on the education laws that affects the children in their care, with the goal of ensuring that they graduate successfully. She's determined to bring awareness of these educational needs to those in positions to change the policies and practices, giving these children greater opportunities and outcomes, and helping build the foundation for their ability to be able to succeed in life after foster care. Please welcome advocate, trainer, and speaker, Sharon Dunlevy, to the show.
Thank you, LaShaundra. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the show. You are very passionate about foster care and helping foster parents, and you do it in a way that I don't see too many people doing. You provide training to the foster parents to kind of help them advocate for and help the children in the care on their educational journeys. Can you share a little bit more about how God led you to become an educational advocate?
Yes. So I actually didn't grow up in a religious family. My parents both were scientists, as well as the Vietnam War really challenged their faith. And so they just were not religious in any way. And so I didn't grow up in that family, but when I was in 10th grade, I took biology and child development at the same time. I thought I was going to be a scientist like my parents. Biology was not for me, but I loved doing this child development class, and we even ran a preschool. So that's when I decided I wanted to be a teacher. And so I went to college, got a special education degree, but also felt called to ministry. So I actually was a children's pastor for about 20 years. And then wanted to do more with vulnerable children. And unfortunately, a lot of churches don't welcome vulnerable children into their midst. So I decided to leave the ministry and serve outside of the church. And so I worked in several different places, but I saw an ad for a educational advocate for a foster care licensing agency. And they specifically were looking for someone who had a special education background, which I had. So I applied for the job and got it, and found a whole new world of kids that I wanted to serve. And really, like you said, God kind of put these things in my way. So like I was led to being a teacher, and then led to go to college. I did find God in college through our church choir, our chapel choir on campus, and became a Christian that way, and then moved into ministry. And now I'm where I'm at.
He'll use every little thing in your life. You think some seasons are like, okay, why did I go through this? But he uses everything. And then later on, you definitely for sure see why. Okay, now I know why I worked at that place or did this. Because every skill you pick up along the way helps you in your purpose. So I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, God's in our lives. And, even when I wasn't going to church and I wasn't aware of his hand in my life, I can look back and see, yes, God put into my heart that I was not going to be a biologist. I was going to be a teacher, all of those things, even before I was aware of his hands in my life.
So you describe children who are in foster care as some of the most vulnerable. What are some of the things that you feel like the public school system can do better or improve on in order to be able to better serve these children?
Yes, a lot of schools, we talk about trauma-informed care, and it's been
Mm-hmm.
talked about in schools, but I don't know that it's being implemented as much as it could be. And I'm not sure, like some of the school districts, they'll do a professional development course on it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like 1 hour. Well, trauma is not something you can learn about in 1 hour, right? It is there, it's all consuming. When somebody is in trauma, especially a child, it's all consuming. Their brain is stuck in fight, flight, or fright or fight mode. And so it's like they can't get out of that. And so when we go to school and they're trying to use traditional discipline like suspending, expulsions, or even sending them to the principal's office, all of those types of punishments can be trauma triggers. Our kids
Mm-hmm.
don't like to be isolated. They don't like to be pointed out. They don't like to be seen as different. And whenever we do something like that, we're constantly triggering their trauma. We need to make schools much more of a safe place for our kids. They need to, that's basically what a kid in trauma needs, is they need to feel safe. And our schools need to be one of those safe places. And what we see is there's a lot of school refusal with foster kids. And a lot of it is just because they feel uncomfortable going to school because
Mm-hmm.
they don't know what to expect. And then you add in all of the trauma of the fact that our kids have access to social media and they're hearing about school shooters and all of these other things. So school right now does not necessarily feel like the safest place for our kids. And we've got to switch that, right? We've got to make it
Mm-hmm.
feel much more safe for them. Not just the foster kids, but every kid,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I found with the public school system specifically is that, like you said, the teachers, the administrators, the staff, they're not properly equipped and trained to handle children who have experienced trauma,
No.
right? And
Yeah.
that's really sad, because I feel like
Yeah.
even nowadays, like it's even worse with everything going on in the world. Like trauma can
Right.
happen at any time. So in your opinion, do you believe that trauma informed training should be something that's required when dealing with children and working in the school setting specifically?
Yes. And I always tell people when they say, what can we do? How can we help this? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like we need to, there's kind of several different layers, right? Those of us who are serving the kids, who are homing, or have the kids in our home, the parents, all of us, we need to be boots on the ground, bringing awareness to this. We need to be the ones that telling people what's going on, why trauma-informed care is so important. Then you have the schools at their level needing to do the professional development. For the teachers who already have their teaching certificates, they need to
Mm-hmm.
have renewal on what does trauma-informed care look like, or for the first time hearing it. And then at the next level, we need the higher ed programs to be putting in very intensive trauma-informed care training. Again, one class for 3 credit hours is probably not enough, because
Mm-hmm.
trauma is so invasive in our kids and what it does physically, mentally, and socially to our kids. And then you have the next level up, which are like the state laws. The states need to be requiring at the teachers that come in, part of their teacher preparedness, they need to be trauma informed. So that would force the higher ed to have to put it into their teaching programs. And then, of course, at the federal level, we need to be then reinforcing this need of trauma-informed care in all of our teacher programs, all of our schools, all of that.
Yes, I do agree with you. I think that it should be required because I've seen too many bad things take place, and then, the schools, they just don't know what to do
They
except for
don't.
call the parent, and,
Mm-hmm.
the parent's working and they have to keep leaving work. And then now, okay, they don't have a
Yeah.
job now. So it's
Yeah.
just a terrible downward spiral.
And not to denigrate the schools, because they're
Mm-hmm.
trying, right?
They
But they
are.
don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be real, we don't put money in this country into our children. We are not, paying these teachers a really good wage,
Yeah.
and they already have too many kids in their classroom. Then we add in a child with trauma, and I understand why they
Yeah.
want to get that kid into the principal's office or something like that, because they already have 35 other kids to take care of. So we do a poor job of setting up our teachers for success and our
Mhm.
schools for success. So, we have to all kind of work together. Getting more aides in the rooms. I used to volunteer in
Yeah.
the classroom, but I know a lot of schools post 9/11 and then post COVID, they've cut back on how many people can come into the schools and help. And that's,
Yeah.
so we're not being able to hire aides, but we're also not being able to use volunteers. It's a vicious cycle, right?
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
really is. And it's hard. We've got to make some big shifts, really big shifts. And then, like you said, in our world right now, we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know what's going to
Mhm.
happen with the Department of Education. We don't know what's going to happen with some of these other federal laws and federal things. So we've got to keep being the boots on the ground to
Mhm.
bring awareness to this. Regardless of what happens at this federal level, we can be doing things to make schools more trauma informed. And when I teach my parents, one of the things I really emphasize is how you set up that relationship with the school and with the teacher, setting it up early, having those
Mhm.
conversations really early with the school and teachers about, I have a child in foster care. These are their triggers. This is how this child wants me to be called, because some children in foster care don't want people to know they're in foster care.
Yeah.
So, what are the ways to make sure they don't feel like they're being highlighted as a foster
Mhm.
kid? Um, and then have that two-way conversation with the teachers so that when there is a problem, they can text you at any time and try this. But also having that two-way conversation of, I I know these are triggers. Can you keep track of what triggers you see? And again, they have lots of kids in their room, but as much as we can work together, the
Mhm.
better it is going to be for that child.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
I know you have a lot of knowledge as well about the educational laws that exist. What are some new policies or laws that you think need to be passed in order to better help these children in foster care?
Yeah, we have the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the first time that federal policy actually focused specifically on the needs of foster children. They used to kind of be up underneath homeless children, but not
Mhm.
by themselves. And so that's really good. And it really has made a difference because it's changed the way that when children leave one home and go to a new home, if that school is out of district, they could stay in that school and be bused there and or transported there at the school's expense. And that helps a lot. The other thing it did was it allowed students who did need to change schools to be enrolled immediately, because
Mhm.
in the past they were only enrolled if they had their birth certificates or their medical records. And any foster parent knows that's sometimes really hard to get. So the
Yeah.
schools couldn't use that anymore to stop them from being enrolled immediately. So we're lessening the amount of time that the kids are out of school, but we still need to make some changes in terms of, like, I also encourage foster parents to use the Individuals with Disabilities Act in order to get an individualized education plan or an IEP.
Mhm.
Trauma is not its own category under IDEA, and it should be. Like, we have to kind of
Yeah.
sneak it in under other categories, but trauma is its own category. It is a disability that these children are dealing with. So we need to redo that. And then under ESSA, we need to bring in some more strategic planning around independent living skills. So even if our kids are going to school and they're able to get enrolled immediately, they're coming out of school and not succeeding as adults. And a lot of that
Mhm.
has to do with this lack of independent living skills. I encourage foster parents and I teach foster parents how to do that themselves, how to teach the kids in their homes independent living skills. But we also need to be building that into our curriculum. And honestly, all kids could use that, right?
Yeah.
In some
Yeah.
ways, there are some skills, but really making sure that we're highlighting where are those gaps. There are assessments out there that you can give, and they will take this assessment and see, oh, this kid is pretty self-sufficient in this area, but not in this area. So we need to build some more of that back into our school systems, just making sure that we're not graduating kids just to graduate them, that they really are ready to move on and move out and be productive members of society, right? We don't want them to come out and be further drains on society. And then, of course, we already talked about adding in that requirement that trauma-informed care be part of the teacher prep programs. That's really important.
So for the IDEA, you said that trauma is not included. What are some of the disabilities or maybe the symptoms that are included under that act so that parents can get services?
Yes. So things like developmental disabilities, specific disabilities are included. We can get a trauma IEP under what's called other health impairments. And it's kind of like this catch-all right now. If a child has severe ADHD and it's affecting their schoolwork, they can fall under other health impairments. If they have PTSD, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, all of those can kind of fall under that other health impairment. What I tell foster parents is get your child diagnosed with something. PTSD, oppositional defiant, conduct disorder. Really work with the doctors and say that you're wanting to get your kid an IEP. They need a diagnosis to help this. And that usually makes a big difference in getting them. The biggest thing is for IDEA, the kids' schoolwork has to be affected by their disability. So if you've got an ADHD kid who's getting A's all the time, you're going to have a hard time getting an IEP, right? Because they're doing fine. But there is another thing you can get, which is called a 504 plan. And that is specifically based on behaviors. So if a school says, no, we're not going to give you an IEP, you can say, well, can we talk about a 504 plan? And what that does is, let's say you've got that ADHD kid that just can't sit still, but his grades are way up here, right? He's one of those kids that he kind of hears it, but not really. And then he just comes right out. But his behaviors are causing him to get into trouble because he's not sitting still. So that 504 plan would allow him to have some accommodations to work around that type of thing. So basically, like instead of having to sit at his desk during a lecture, he's allowed to circle the back of the room out of sight of the other kids where he's listening, but not sitting, so that he's not disruptive at his desk. Those are the types of things a 504 plan can do. And it also protects them from being removed or suspended past 10 days if they have that 504 plan, because they have to have a hearing then at that point.
That's really good. And a lot of parents don't know about these different laws. They're laws, right? They're laws that are in place.
Laws.
Yes, that are in place to kind of provide those extra services and accommodations their child may need. And I want to ask you a question, like when dealing with the schools and stuff like that, why do they not often mention 504 and IEP? It's like they won't say it directly. I find it very strange.
I do too. And I'm not really sure. And I get this question all the time because there's title funds that pay for this, right? It's not like the school is taking money out of the taxpayers' pockets. I mean, it's coming from the federal level. There's money aside for these laws. Now, my assumption is the money that they're getting for the federal government probably is not enough. And that may be where the disconnect comes in. But honestly, I don't understand. I mean, personally, if we paid our teachers better and we were able to have smaller classes, I personally believe every child benefits from an individual education plan, right? Yeah. Like the ideal to me would be, you don't have to be labeled with a disability. You get a plan that's right just for you. I mean, that would mean the child who is gifted and in artistry could have a specific plan based on that gift. So, I do think it's a funding issue. I really do. I think what we hear in terms of, they've got title funds, and what comes down to them, I have a feeling is a big disconnect. And we don't hear those numbers. And so I don't know how much of a disconnect there is, but that's my assumption, is there's a disconnect.
I completely agree with you. I'm always like, why do we have to diagnose something to help these
Mm-hmm.
kids? That I just don't get it. But I agree with
Mm-mm.
you. I feel like every kid should have an individual plan. But once again, it comes down to the
Yeah.
money, I guess,
It,
and the funding.
and
Yeah.
the funding and the size of the classrooms, the amount of help they have in the classroom.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a teacher. It's really hard to lesson plan for even just 5 different types of kids in the room, right? Imagine 30 different kinds of kids in the room and trying to catch all of their different learning styles and all of that. It's hard. It is very hard, and we do what we can, but I just think we undervalue our education system, and so at the federal level, and they don't get enough money to do what they really need to do. And I should say not just the federal level, we undervalue it at the state level too.
To a foster parent that's listening, what is one thing that you find that they are just unaware of, that it's so imperative that they know before even fostering a child, but you find often that they just don't know?
Yeah. So there's several things, but the biggest one that I really think is, and because I'm so focused on what happens after these kids age out,
Mm-hmm.
there are, one, I think foster parents don't know that if they adopt early, their children lose a lot of services, and it drives me crazy. So a foster kid is under Medicaid, and they're able to get counseling and all of these other things paid for, right? That's part of being in foster care. As soon as they're adopted, if they're adopted before the age of 16, they lose all of those services. Unless your state, certain states do have different types of provisions, but basically you've lost those provisions. There's this mentality, well, they're adopted, they don't have trauma anymore, which is not true. So one, I would look at that. What is the timing of the adoption? Is it medically going to help the kid? And I hate that we have to make that decision, right? We should just be able to adopt the kids and love them, and they should be happy, but financially there are some disadvantages to adopting. The other thing is, as these kids get older, once they hit the age of 14, there's a law called the Family First Prevention Services Act, and that law provides funds for our kids to get help educationally. So you can get money for a tutor. If they want to go to college, you can get money for the entrance exams, the test prep. Once they go to college, they can get money for a computer, all of these things. If they want to go to vocational training, there's money set aside for that. And that's from 14 all the way up to age 26 in some states. Most states stop between 21 and 23, just depending. But because earlier it stopped at 18, but we realized, our kids weren't even graduating high school at 18, right? They're mostly graduating late. And so we needed to up that number, right, the age where they're getting help. But that law that provides these funds, if your state doesn't have a program that's in place, like I live in Indiana, and we have a program in place called collaborative care. And as soon as the child starts aging, getting close to aging out, they have the choice to remain a foster child, but they could live independently under these funds with some help, getting help for rent and all of these things. They can help you get your driver's license. I had one student who took full advantage of the collaborative care program, and they got him an apartment, a roommate. They got him his driver's license. He decided he didn't want a car, but they got him a motorbike. He's a manager at a Domino's. He's doing great. But that was because he chose to follow that program. Some of the states don't have that kind of thing in place. So then the kids don't know. And I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago from the Annie Casey Foundation, and the money that's set aside for this act, they said is so underutilized right now. Maybe 40% of their tutoring money is being used. The vocational and educational vouchers, 12% is being used right now. That is, that's a lack of information, right? So I'm always making sure. And when I train my foster parents and I give them their guide on how to use these family first monies, they're like, we didn't even know this existed. And unfortunately, and I just had this conversation with another host, unfortunately, there's also an issue within the child welfare workers. because they're coming out of school so young, again, very low paid job. So the caseworkers tend to be people who are right out of college, right? So they don't really know anything. And then they turn over so fast that it's really hard for them to know all the laws that affect the kids. They don't know what type of laws they should be talking about to their parents because they have not taught that. And so they need to be aware of these, especially that family first, because if like a state that does not provide tutoring, Indiana, we do have a budget in a state level for tutoring. So if I have a foster kid that needs a tutor, I can apply to their case manager to get them a tutor. A lot of states don't have that, but they should be able to use that family first money in order to get them a tutor. So it's just a matter of knowing those laws are out there, and they just don't.
Yeah. Wow, that's really good information. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't even know that, so that's really good. So we talked about like the 504, the IEP. There's so many different laws that exist for a foster parent that's listening. They're overwhelmed. They don't even know where to start. How do they access this information somewhere like a centralized place where it's in one area where they can just get everything they need?
Sort of. So most departments of education within your state will have some subcategory for foster kids. So you should be able to look there. Or if you just put in, let's say you're from Michigan, you put in Michigan foster children, you should be able to go to a page that's going to show you some of these things. But a lot of times you do have to dig. So like I said, when I teach, I have a state contract with Ohio, and I teach an education rights class for them. I dug up all of their paperwork and I give it to the parents when I teach the class so they have it. There are handbooks out there. It's like there is an ESSA, or Every Student Succeeds handbook for foster parents, but I had to find it, right? So yeah, you may have to do a little bit of digging on your websites. Like, so make Google your friend. Say, like I said, I would start with putting in like Michigan foster care or something like that. The other thing you can do is there is a child welfare information gateway. I think that's how they say it. If you look that up, they have a lot of state resources as well. You can go to a page that will have information based on your state, and I get a lot of information from them as well.
Perfect. That's good. I was reading one of your blog posts, and it talked about trauma and you said the IDEA. We already talked about the disabilities that qualify a parent under that. Have you found that parents going through the process of securing these services, that they face like pushback or difficulty a lot?
They do. And it's more of, again, it kind of goes back to that funding thing. For whatever reason, the schools are really tight with how they want to apply it. So a lot of times schools will tell them, well, let's try this first. Let's try this first. Let's do this first. That's fine. But what I always tell my parents is, based on the federal law, those types of interventions cannot cause the school to delay doing the evaluation. So if you request an evaluation in writing, and there is proof that the child is not doing well in school because of whatever reason, they can try those interventions, but they still have to start the timeline for the evaluation. Every state has a different timeline. Indiana, it's 50 school days that they have to do the evaluation and call the first team meeting to go over the evaluation results. In Ohio, where I teach, it's an 80-day school day timeline. So that's a whole semester, when you think about that. And so you want to get that request in, and then you need to remind them, that's fine, we can try these, but I still want my child to be evaluated. If the schools continue to push back and say no, there is what's called an independent educational evaluation. And that is part of the federal law. If you feel like the school is not honoring your request and this child needs that evaluation, you can tell the school, well, I want them to have an independent educational evaluation, and the school has to pay for it. So,
oh, wow.
So there are ways to make sure the school does what it needs to do.
Yeah, I think it's all coming down to being an advocate for
Yes.
these children, your children,
Yes.
whether they're foster care or by
Yeah.
birth. Like, we have to advocate for them, because if we're
Yes.
not gonna do it, then who's going to?
Right.
We have
Yeah.
to advocate, and we have to become educated too. Like you said, we
Mm-hmm.
have to do the work. We have to do some research
Yeah.
and seek out that
Yeah.
information. It's there. You'd be
It is.
surprised how many programs, how many laws, just how much stuff
Mm-hmm.
there is out there to support you, but you have to do the work. So
Yeah, you do.
absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of the states, and again, that Child Welfare Information Gateway will show these too. A lot of the states also have advocacy programs for foster parents, but you have to know they're there again,
Yeah.
right? You don't always know. So looking for those types of things. When I teach in Ohio, there's two, like there's one called Learning Aid Ohio, and I forget the name of the other one. But if you have like very specific IEP questions, you go to them and they'll answer it. We have one here in Indiana called InSource. Same thing. That is their role, is to answer questions around developmental disabilities and getting educational help. And so there are resources, but again, you have to do the work. You have to be willing to say, my kid needs more. And I'm not just going to rely on the schools to step up. I'm going to step up and get them what they need. And that's really what it comes down to.
Can we speak on like mental health and how foster care can have like a significant impact on the mental health of the children who are in the system?
Yeah. Yeah. So 80% of kids in foster care have some type of mental health issue, usually fairly severe. And the reason that is because just being removed from their family is a trauma in itself. So if you count that as a trauma, we don't even count, not even counting what happened to them before they were removed. There are children who are removed for bad reasons. Yes, that happens. It's not as big as some of the detractors try and say, but it does happen. We do have some states who still remove children because of poverty, rather than trying to help the family in poverty to not have to lose their kids. Again, that's a failing in our society. We tend to be reactive, not proactive. We could save ourselves a lot of money if we were more proactive, but putting that aside, you're going to have kids in foster care no matter what. And so we have to do the best for them. But yes, so they're going to have trauma based on whatever happened. Were they abused? Were they born addicted to drugs? Did their parents drink and do drugs in front of them? Their educational neglect, if they weren't sent to school, they can be removed. Did they live in poverty? Parents lose kids because they lost their job, and that's something to remember, is this could happen to anybody, because one day to the next, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, all these federal workers that are losing their jobs, right? Nobody thought that was going to ever happen. And those federal jobs have really good health care. So now they've lost their health care, their income, everything. So there's a lot of factors that go into what's causing a child to be removed. So all of those factors build up into trauma. Then once they're removed, all of that is still there, right? There's new trauma. They're getting used to a new family. They're getting used to maybe a new school. All of a sudden, they have all these caseworkers and therapists and everybody who wants to know their life story, And so these poor kids is just trauma on top of trauma. So all of them do get Medicaid, and so they should have access to therapy. Now, there's lots of different ways to do therapy, right? And what I find is, like here in Indianapolis, there's no problem. You pretty much can find a child therapist. The ones that struggle are those who are in like rural areas where they don't have the same resources we do. I have a lot of rural families that just cannot find a therapist for their kids. And that to me is, that's sad. Well, not just sad, that's scary, right? Yeah. Like, these kids deserve the same resources that they would have if they were in a city. And somehow, I don't know if it has to be virtual. I don't know if it has to be telehelp. I mean, some of those things, I know they're not the best solution, but they would provide something. But I do know, I know of a couple of different people who are working on programs for foster parents. They're working on apps to find ways to connect foster parents to more types of resources like that. But we really need to think about these rural settings and what kind of resources they have. Because if we don't help the kids early on and get them being able to at least manage their trauma, when they become adults, they're much more likely to have eating disorders, substance abuse, they still might be easily triggered. They tend not to be able to hold a job because they've never dealt with whatever triggers, so they lose their jobs because they either fly off the handle or they shy away from everything. They're not being able to be successful because they didn't deal with that mental health issue early. So, I don't know how to solve the problem of the rurals, but I mean, as much as you can get those kids into the services that they are provided, we need to do that. And we need to just make sure that they're getting the help that they need. And it's hard sometimes. Caregivers want to feel like they're the ones that have to do all the caregiving. But really, I like to talk about foster parenting as being part of a team. So when you're a foster parent, you're going to have therapists, you're going to have case managers, you're going to have school staff, you're going to have all these people that are coming in and out of your house and your lives. And it's a lot. It can be a lot. But it's all a team with that child in the center of that team. And if we look at it that way and really focus on the kid, I think all of this stuff works its way out a little bit, but we've got to keep that kid in the center.
It takes a team and a village, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
It's okay to ask for help. And I think too, catching the issues in childhood is good. Getting that help and recovery and healing, because it does impact you, even if you are not aware of it in your adult life, if you don't deal with it as soon as possible. So that's so necessary and so important. Can you share any words of advice or encouragement to a parent who's listening today?
Yes. We're not going to be perfect. Just like we said, our kids have triggers. We as adults have triggers. And so remember that we're not going to be perfect, and one mistake is not going to ruin your child, right? We all have those thoughts sometimes, right? Like, oh my gosh, I yelled at them. Now they're going to be, they're going to go out and get 10,000 tattoos and whatever. Right? I've got a 23-year-old and I still have those thoughts sometimes, like, did I ruin my kid? None of us are perfect, but take care of yourself as a parent. It's like the whole airplane analogy where they tell you to put your mask on first before you put the mask on the child or whoever needs help. You've got to take care of yourself first. So really baby yourself, and it's okay. It's not selfish. I always say it's not selfish, it's self-care, because we can't care for others if our cup is empty. We can't pour into others if our cup is empty. And so we need to make sure that we are keeping ourselves healthy, that we're aware of our own triggers. There are many. I'm a fight person. So if I'm backed into a corner, my trauma response is fight. And I have to remind myself to walk away sometimes, right? Don't let that mouth open right now, because something's going to come out that I'm going to regret. And we all have those types of triggers. So just be gentle with yourself, be aware, and just take care of yourself, because you've got an important job to do raising kids. And we all can do it really well, but we have to care for ourselves.
That's really good. Sharon, thank you so much for the incredible advice, knowledge, and education that you've shared on the show today. Where can our community connect with you or learn more about you?
The best place to find me is LinkedIn, and it's just Sharon Dunlevy, Dunlevy. And I'm there all the time. I connect with people on LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. And so that's the best place to find me.
Perfect. And to our lovely community, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Did this help someone out? If it did, please share this with someone else so they can be educated on everything they need to know to help their children. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.